Before we get started today, I want to take a moment to note the passing of retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Justin Constantine, who was a guest on Next Steps Forward episode on June 29th, 2021. Lieutenant Colonel Constantine joined the Marine Corps while in law school at the University of Denver School of Law and served as a Judge Advocate General Officer for 6 years. As a reservist, he deployed to Iraq in 2006 as a civil affairs team leader attached to an infantry battalion. During a combat patrol, Justin was shot in the head by a sniper. The original prognosis was that he had been killed in action, but thanks to risks taken by fellow Marines and a courageous Navy corpsman, he survived. He lost his sight in his right eye. With most of his teeth missing and the loss of part of his tongue, he could no longer speak perfectly clear, but he made his points with compelling clarity. He could no longer run because doctors removed bones from his legs to reconstruct his upper and lower jaws. And he suffered from the effects of post-traumatic stress and a traumatic brain injury. Yet despite all that, Justin Constantine was a presidential leadership scholar. He was named the Champion of Change for Veterans by President Barack Obama. And he was one of the wounded warriors whose image was painted by President George W. Bush in his book, Portraits of Courage. In 2017, Justin received the Henry Viscardi Achievement Award for shaping attitudes, raising awareness, and improving the quality of life for people with disabilities, and the Veterans Advantage Hero Vet Award for significantly contributing to the veteran community through ongoing service and leadership. Justin Constantine was a patriot and a hero, an ordinary man who did extraordinary things in the face of almost insurmountable odds. Justin Constantine was a patriot, he was a friend to many, an inspiration to everyone who heard his story. Sadly, cancer claimed his life this past week. Justin Constantine, you'll be missed.
You will.
Our guest today is Crystal Romero. Master Sergeant Crystal Romero retired after serving 16 and a half years in the United States Army National Guard. She served full-time, providing active duty operational support, primarily in her home state of New Mexico. Today, she's an activist for veterans' causes and has had a significant role in passing legislation related to military sexual assault and veterans' mental health. We'll talk about those topics and more during this episode of Next Steps Forward. Crystal Romero, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you for having me.
No, great to have you with us today. Crystal, you had a difficult childhood, which included abuse and time in the foster care system. I know that's an uncomfortable subject, but it was also very formative to your life. Would you share your story of your early years up to the time when you became an emancipated minor at age 16?
Thank you, Chris. And yes, it is an uncomfortable subject, but sometimes in order to move on with life, you have to find comfort in the pain. And once you get comfortable, it doesn't hurt you anymore. And that's why I've decided to just hit the road and talk about it, because there's a lot of folks out there that are still suffering in silence. My difficult childhood goes a lot deeper for me than just me. My mother was 14 when she became pregnant with me and was a single mother in high school. But luckily for my mom, her high school principal not only helped her graduate, but he helped her raise me. And that wonderful man's name is Jose G. Lucero. He was a sergeant during World War II and a Bataan Death March survivor. He and his wife, Stella, baptized me, and I became, their godchild. My mom wholeheartedly loved me, and she did her best, but she was a child herself, and a child who had come from trauma. So that's pretty much why I fell victim to sexual abuse at age 8, which I was too young to understand then. And again, at age 14, when I was trafficked to Colorado. But as tragic as all that was, where I learned the most important lessons was that I learned that, that's never going to happen to me again. And it was at that point that I entered foster care, and where I was kicked out. I was kicked out of foster care for stabbing my foster father in the shoulder with a fork because I walked in on him molesting my 8-year-old foster sister. And from there, I went into group homes where it's just survival of the fittest. There's no mercy on the streets. And I survived because I joined a gang. And ultimately, that was my protection until I emancipated at 16 and was able to kind of start putting my pieces of my life back together.
You mentioned being trafficked to Colorado. How did that happen, and how did you escape that situation?
In 1983, chat rooms became real popular, and more, more of them started popping up on the internet. So of course, as a curious teenager, I found a chat room about music, and I was befriended by who I thought was a 16-year-old boy. He was very nice. He gave me compliments. I mean, it's a whole truckload of BS. But what he was doing was grooming me. And for those who don't know what grooming is, it's when someone presents a false persona to somebody, and tells them lies to lure them into a false sense of security so that you become vulnerable. And then when you become vulnerable, you start opening up and you start talking about things that are, bothering in your life and all these things. And once they know that you feel safe, that's when the manipulation begins. And that's how he convinced me to steal money and buy a bus ticket to Colorado. Except when I got there, it was not a 16-year-old boy, it was a 42-year-old man. And I thought for sure I was going to die. Once it registered in my head, everything about that situation, it was too late. And I was held in a basement for days. It was actually, what's weird is that it was actually his sister's basement. It wasn't even his house, it was his sister's house. But I figured out how to pick the lock and get out. I don't know, maybe too much watching MacGyver as a kid, I don't know. But I got out and I called my mom, and her and my stepdad drove 3 hours to pick me up. But after that, my mental state was not stable at all. I was now a very angry teenager, and I was very reckless. I was, I would act out, lie, steal, skip school, very self-destructive. And that's what led me to becoming a ward of the state. And that's when I entered the foster care system.
Before the show, you and I were talking about our mutual friend and great woman, Andy Berger. Could someone have figured out early on that you're being trafficked? What are the signs of human trafficking? Is it ordinary citizens? How can you figure out who is or isn't being trafficked?
Oh man, well, I think Andy did a way better job of explaining it than I will. But I'm actually excited to have met her because, as I told you, I am going to partner with her to tackle this issue. But I didn't have much online supervision from my mom. She, had she monitored my usage, then I think that she would have seen that I was being groomed by someone, because an adult brain is a lot more advanced than a 13-year-old's brain. And that's how it's, like I said, that's how it starts. And when I started having problems at home, what I do, I get online and chat with my best friend. And so he would kind of cause conflict. He would initiate these fights that I would have with my mom. Like in other words, he would tell me stuff like, "Oh, well, I would never treat you that way. If it were me, I would do this." And so I'd get angry at my mom. I'd be like, "Yeah, you're right." So I'd go pick a fight with my mom. And that brainwashing was what helped him to acquire me, because he didn't even have to physically kidnap me. He just convinced me to do it on my own. As far as how to spot a trafficker, take a look around, because it could be anybody. They look like you, they look like me, they look like younger people, because oftentimes younger kids are groomed to become they're bait. They go off and they recruit. It's a $43 billion industry, and it's very hard to tackle, which is why it's been going on forever. But if you do identify a perpetrator, the best thing to do is to be very tactful about it. It's like, write down everything. If you see something, write it down, call the police right away. There's a national hotline that you can call, but obviously not everybody knows that number. But call the police, call 911. Write down as much as you can: the license plate, the car, what they look like, what they're wearing. If the child that's with them if there's any identifying marks, bruises, if they look scared. So a kid um, that's being trafficked, especially when it's at the beginning, they're terrified. And as an adult, I think you can identify what a scared child looks like.
Has human trafficking gotten worse since maybe the 60s or 70s, as in more common or more violent? Or are we just more aware of it today?
Women and children have been victims of sex trafficking for thousands of years. The practice has been going on for centuries, and finally, it did become a political issue in the 1900s. But it's very difficult as technology has gotten better. The pandemic did not help at all. The pandemic actually boosted those numbers. I think here in the US, the numbers went up by 96% because now there's more kids online because schools were closed. So now the kids are online and with very to little supervision because their parents are also online working from home. So, something my padrino told me is that evil is always ready for you. So you have to be ready. You have to be ahead, you have to stay ahead of it. And so one of the ways that people can protect their kids is be involved in every aspect of their life. I've got 3 daughters and I am a nosy mom. I am always all up in their business and they hate me for it now, but it's my job to keep them safe. And if pissing them off is what does it, then that's okay. Because 20, 30 years from now, they're gonna thank me that, hey mom, thank you for, because when they get older, they're gonna experience all those things, right? As an adult, you see evil, you see things happen. And so they're gonna see the world for what it really is. But they'll be an adult and they'll be very well matured so that they know how to combat that. So educate your kids, and as soon as they're able to operate an electronic device that is linked to the web.
People who aren't familiar with sexual abuse, especially child sexual abuse, often wonder why the victim doesn't just speak up and say something. Would you address that? And then in cases of human trafficking, there are other dynamics at work that keep victims quiet. Can you talk about those dynamics as well, please?
When you ask, why didn't you just leave? You're assuming that everyone has a place to go. And it's such a privileged question because not everybody has some place to go, especially if you're a kid. You're 14 years old. What are you going to do? Leave your parents? And what if your abuser is somebody you know? Plus, you got to think about the trauma and what it does to the brain. It takes an average of 7 to 10 years to process that kind of abuse. I mean, just imagine what it does to your psyche and your self-esteem and how long it would take to undo that psychological warfare that's been done, which ultimately is the worst part. And victims will tell you that it's not the physical. It's what they do to your mind, your body, your spirit. That's what takes so long to overcome. So in terms of traffickers, how do they keep their victims quiet? Oh, there's so many things. Drugs. Drugs, they isolate you. In my case, I was locked up. I was locked in a basement. Manipulation, physical abuse, threats on your life. There's so many things that they can do. And these are masterminds. They're master manipulators. So sometimes all it takes is just them sweet talking you, and before you know it, they've got you.
You and I spoke last week, and a number of quotes from other people came to mind. The first is by Japanese writer Haruki Murakami. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. How are you different after those storms in your childhood and teen years? And obviously, it can't be accomplished alone, but how can others become different, stronger, better when they go through the storms of abuse at the hands of others?
I had a lot to overcome. And I think joining the military is what helped me to get my mind right. Because the whole point of, when you join the military and you go to basic training, the whole point of them breaking you down is so that they can rebuild you. And they rebuild you in a way where you're mentally and physically stronger. And I really wanted to get out of that life so badly, because that's not at all how I wanted my life to look like. So, I wanted to live like, I wanted to be a hero, like my padrino. I wanted to do good in the world. So I had to convince myself, hey, you've got two choices. You can stay on the streets and who knows what'll happen to you, or you can go to the military like you've always wanted, So I kind of chose to stick with my dream. And I had a lot of really good leadership that provided opportunities for me so that I could rebuild myself. And that's exactly what I did. To answer about how others can become, you said, different, stronger, better. Don't be ashamed of yourself. Seek professional help. There's a lot of stigma around people getting help. And I'm telling you right now, that is your survival tool, because you'll learn how to cope with certain things so that you don't turn to drugs and alcohol. I mean, at any point in my life, I've had plenty of opportunities to become an alcoholic or a drug abuser. But, I got to stay true to myself. And it's like, that's not what I want for my life. I've got too many adventures that I want to go on. So again, just don't be ashamed, because you know what? The trauma that's happened to you is not your fault. And once you learn that, you're unstoppable.
We chose Always March Forward for the title of today's podcast as a play on your birthday, which is March 4th. Would you take the story from here about why you joined the Army?
Oh man, I love this story. This story just never gets old. When I was a little kid, I was probably like around 8 or 9, my padrino would always tell me that I was born to be a soldier because of my birthday. I was born on March 4th, and soldiers always march forward. And I believe that. And I am and will always be a soldier.
So many kids who are victims of sexual or physical abuse would have given up or turned down a dark path. Did your life ever start to go down that dark path? You talked about alcohol, drugs, all those opportunities.
I never did alcohol and drugs, or at least not in a way where it, I abused it or it became a habit. But my life has gone down a dark path many times. And Chris, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't give up, because there's many times that I did give up. As a suicide attempt survivor, I can tell you exactly how I felt during those really dark times, how alone I felt as a kid and as an adult. And I can tell you that you have to get to a really low point in your life to where you want to commit suicide, or die by suicide, I should say. That's a form of leaving. That's a form of running away. You're running away from the problem. That's a way of getting away from the problem. And overcoming that as a child, the military helped me do that, because I went into the military as an angry little kid. But I learned discipline. I learned respect. And it's really what pulled me out of it. But I'm kind of still going through a dark time now, because I've spent the last 10 years of my life putting myself back together after facing the retaliation that I faced in the military. That psychological warfare was harder to overcome because it happened to me as an adult. And it happened to me in an environment where I should have been protected. So yeah, I dark paths all the time. I have given up a few times, but you know what too? That just like a super quick story. My padrino, he told me this. He shared this with me about his service. As a prisoner of war, he endured a lot of torture, and he and some battle buddies of his, they were caught taking the firing pins out of the rifles of the Japanese soldiers. And as punishment, the Japanese soldiers held him down and cut off his testicles, and they made him watch. And the reason why he shared that story with me, even it's so personal and it's so awful, is because he told me, he's like, you know what, there's going to be people in life that are going to try to take things from you. And, they took away something that gave him the ability to have children. And quite frankly, something that makes him a man. But that didn't stop him from having kids, because he's got me and 6 other godchildren, right? He's like, well, if I can't make them, I'll find some. And also he became an educator and a mentor, to other soldiers and to me. And they never took away who he was. And that's, I use that as a survival tool as well. I think about that all the time. Like, you know what, my leadership, they took away my career, but they will never take away the fact that I am a leader of soldiers, and I still mentor soldiers all the time. So
A few moments ago, you talked about being true to yourself, in your inner compass. Obviously, your padrino was a role model, but you also had another role model and inspiration in the person of a female officer in your first unit. What was it about her that was so inspirational, and what did she do to help further your Army career and your personal development?
my first unit assignment, my commander was a female. And it actually, the female thing goes back a little bit further. When I was in 5th grade, I was the pen pal for a female first lieutenant that was deployed to Operation Desert Storm. So that's really where a lot of inspiration came on to, that further validated my wanting to join the military. But when I got to my after basic training in my advanced school, when I got to my first unit, my commander was a woman. And I remember, I still to this day, the conversations I had with her about like everything that I wanted to do. I'm like, I enlisted and I went in as an armorer, and I worked in logistics. But I told her, I said, I really want to be a photographer. I was at the time I was going to college, so I was going to school for graphic design, and I was like, and photography, and I said, I really want to do that. And especially as soon as I found out that there was photographers and combat photographers, I'm like, oh man, that's so badass. I want to do that. So she told me, she says, you know what? She says, don't be in a big hurry. She's like, you've got your whole life, but focus on getting, getting acclimated to this environment. And after 2 minutes, then, after 2 years, then you can apply to the public affairs detachment and then carry on. And that is exactly what I did. So she was a huge inspiration to me.
Crystal, you became involved in the issue of military sexual assault awareness and prevention. What was your motivation to become involved?
Well, my motivation to get involved 10 years ago was that was when I first discovered that we had such a huge problem in the military. In 2008, I believe, is when the Army stood up the SHARP program, which is the Sexual Harassment Response Assault Prevention Program. I don't even know what it is to be, but I went to this training, and it was like 40 hours of this monster that we have, this problem with sexual violence in our military. And that was just like astounding to me, because I was like, what, like that? Because that was not my experience. So at least not in the military, but I have experience. So I know what it does to the brain. I know what it does, to your self-esteem, to every aspect of your life. So when I was appointed as the victim advocate for the sexual assault program, I took that to heart. Now, fast forward to 2020, I saw Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen's face popped up on my timeline one day, and oh man, I was very triggered. I was triggered in a way that kind of made me unstoppable, because I was infuriated. I was infuriated with all the lies, all of it, every part of it. The piss poor investigation, the disrespect to her family, all of it. And I thought, you know what? I'm not in the military anymore, but I kind of have a bigger voice now because I'm not in the military. I'm not bound by those, rules and regulations. So I took it to heart. I took to the streets. I watched other advocates. I studied them. I studied their speeches, and I taught myself kind of how to be an advocate because I had never done advocacy work before. And my motivation is that our service members deserve better. They really do. It's like, people say, oh, well, you volunteer. Yeah, but it's a privilege to be in the military. It really is, because the opportunities that you're afforded, you're never going to get that anywhere else.
You've said that in your first unit, you felt like you had 5 dads and 17 brothers, and they were very protective of you. The organization Protect Our Defenders cites statistics indicating approximately 38% of female military personnel and veterans have experienced military sexual trauma. Did you get the sense when you were in active duty the numbers were that high? And was it something that was talked about or just kept quiet?
I was 22 years old when I was recruited to this unit of all men. There was I never at any time though felt in danger. Never at any time did I feel unsafe, or did they, creep me out or, make me uncomfortable. They very much protected me. And like I told you before, and up until the point of when I went to that training for the sexual assault program, I was completely unaware of how bad it was, because like I said, that was not my experience, but rather than, I guess that's where I can say that I know that men and women can serve together because I did it, right? I did it. And there's lots of other women who have had the same experience as me. Unfortunately, not everybody does, but yeah, I had the protection of men, but luckily for me, the difference is that in my unit, there was men assigned and not monsters. And I'm grateful for that too, because imagine being assaulted by someone that you think of as like a father figure or like a brother figure, right? I mean, just think of how horrible that is. I can't even wrap my head around it, to be honest with you. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no. So we've touched a few times on your military career, the positive with the female leader you had when you came on board, your unit now where you had 17 brothers. We didn't talk about how your career ended. And one thing you wanted to touch on today was on moral injury. Could you talk about moral injury and take it from there?
Yeah. And also, reactive behavior. But one of the things, what the big difference is, the defining difference is leadership. If leadership is setting the example and leading by example, you're not going to have those behaviors. For example, my first sergeant at my WMD unit did not tolerate any disrespect or misconduct. None. When you see zero tolerance, it was zero tolerance. And where there's discipline, there's respect. And when there's respect, you won't have problems like harassment and assault. We feared disappointing him, and feared him in a way of we didn't want him to look down on us like, man, I thought you were better than that. And he held me to very, very high standards. And that's something that, we hold all of our soldiers to very high standards. So, and that goes for both praise and punishment. But moral injury is when, I'll use the example of what I went through. I identified a problem and I pointed it out to my leadership. And because they had personal relationships with the person involved and the person's family, they instead of doing the right thing and making the right decision and just fixing the situation, they ignored it. They turned a blind eye to it. And then they made my life a living hell. And that was so hard for me because I could not wrap my head around why is this happening? I trusted these people. It goes back to when I said, about experiencing the dark times. I trusted these people. I respected them. I had high standards of them. I thought, man, you guys had an opportunity to do the right thing here and you chose to do the wrong thing. And that wrong decision led to a domino effect of other wrong things. Because by not supporting me, they weren't supporting the rest of our organization. And the younger junior NCOs and younger generation, they see that. And if you're not leading by example, then you're part of the problem. And going against your own morals, I was reprimanded by a colonel. He called me in his office. There was another sergeant major in the room, and actually an Air Force sergeant major, and because I worked for a joint program, and he stood there and yelled at me and told me that I was the most unprofessional NCO that he had ever met, because I wouldn't lie on an evaluation that was coming up that was going to be conducted by National Guard Bureau. I was like, I will not. And he yelling at me and telling me that I was unprofessional for that. I mean, that really does something to your head, because then I had to really think about that. Like, am I wrong for that? Am I wrong for not standing by my brothers, standing by my leadership, supporting them? And now I'm like, no, I will not compromise my integrity because you guys can get your shit together, basically. So moral injury is when you're having to face, you're put in a position where you have to question yourself and your morals, and then be witness to leadership, people that you look up to, making those wrong decisions and doing the wrong thing instead of the right thing.
Knowing how excited you were for your career in the military, you talked about being a combat photographer. Going through this, how did that make you feel? I mean, personal struggles, mental struggles. Like you said, you're getting yelled at by a colonel for doing the moral right thing. How does that just weigh on you?
It wasn't even so much how they responded, right? How they responded was so disappointing. I mean, they were lying to me, just straight lying to my face. And when I was told I was being taken off of orders, when I was relieved. I was relieved 3 days after being told by Guard Bureau that I was doing a great job. Actually, they praised me and said, you're doing a great job. It's very clear that you have passion for this program. But then 3 days later, I was relieved. And that's what derailed my career. And I thought, and all I could think of in that moment was how hard it took me to get there, right? How hard I worked to overcome all of my childhood trauma, the challenges of being a woman in the military. I didn't face a lot of harassment, honestly. Like I told you, I didn't. Luckily, I was lucky in that regard. But there's other challenges, right? Like I'm 5 feet tall. I'm 5 feet tall, 112 pounds. So when I have to keep up with men, it takes a toll on your body. All the training that I attended, that's time away from my family. And I have a lot of training. I went to a lot of training. And so that hurt. That hurt really bad. And I had to, it's like, okay, now I got to overcome this. And, it's taking me 10 years to do that. But I'm stronger now for it. I'm better for it. And also I can use it as a tool, right? I can use it as a tool to teach leaders, like moving forward. Hey, you have the power of life and death in your tongue. What do you want? Do you want good NCOs? Because if you build up your NCOs, we are their backbone. So do you want us strong, standing on our own 2 feet, or do you want us buried under the ground? I mean, and it's really sad that my leadership would have rather have seen me buried under the ground than standing on my own 2 feet. But you know what? Those aren't leaders. Those are wolves in sheep's clothing. So, and there's lots of those everywhere, you know, just like with the sex trafficking stuff, master manipulators. There's evil everywhere.
Last week's guest, Dr. Cliff Robertson, founded and leads the Warriors Refuge. It's a nonprofit organization in West Columbia, Texas, that provides shelter, counseling, resources, and training to veterans in need. He noted the strong link between mental health issues and veterans' homelessness. Studies show that 40% of homeless women veterans have faced military sexual trauma, and that veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma are more than twice as likely to experience homelessness. Can you connect the dots for us in terms of sexual assault, mental health issues, and homelessness in the veteran community?
The mental impact of sexual assault in the military differs from civilian experiences because it's compounded by feelings of betrayal of those believed to be your comrade in arms, or when the command system fails to protect, you know, the victim. You know, it's like I said, it's like it's that psychological warfare, and a lot of people, if you don't have the tools to help get yourself out of that mess, you turn to things to cope. You know, I had a soldier who had turned to methamphetamines and heroin to cope with her rape. And I mean, you have to think about, like, how bad does your life have to be where you turn to something so awful? And rape is awful. It's horrible. It's you've been violated. You know, something's been taken away from you that you were not willing to give away. And it just goes back to psychological warfare. And drugs and alcohol are the most likely used things that people use to cope. And when you get addicted to those things, your life will start getting farther and farther away from your goals, because now you're doing whatever you can to get that fix. And, you know, you lose your house, you lose your family, you lose trust. You know, you lose trust from your family. Your family won't want you around because they're like, well, is she going to steal from me? You know, or is he going to steal from me? So it just gets worse. And I think that if we don't really focus on, you know, what's making people fall in the water rather than pulling people out of the water, then history is just going to keep repeating itself. And our homeless numbers are going to go up. Our suicide numbers are going to go up. Drug and alcohol abuse numbers are going to go up. It's a huge problem. And sexual assault is often the catalyst for that.
You've worked through the legislative system to make things better. Tell us about the legislation that you've advocated for and what the results have been.
In 2020, the I Am Vanessa Guillen bill, September of 2020, the I Am Vanessa Guillen bill was introduced as a result of the brutal death of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen. And, you know, she didn't have the confidence in her chain of command, and her death was a result of failures on their behalf. So in June of 2021, it merged with the Military Justice Improvement and Increasing Prevention Act. And I have it actually summarized, and I'm going to read that because I don't want to get it wrong. But in the act would transfer the decision to prosecute a service member under the military justice system for felony level non-military crimes such as murder, rape, and domestic violence from commanders to military attorneys with significant trial experience. In other words, think of it this way. If you have a gunshot wound to the chest, are you going to go to a dentist? No, you're going to go to a certified surgeon who specializes in putting people back together that have been shot, wounded in any way. You're not going to go to the dentist because in all actuality, that's not his lane. That's not his subject matter expertise. So taking that decision process out of the commander's hands and putting it in the hands of people that are trained professionals, that are trained and licensed in that field, was huge. And it would improve, and it's going to improve the response on sexual assault, I think. The second piece of legislation that I worked on was the Brandon Act. The Brandon Act is a suicide prevention bill that will afford service members to seek mental health treatment without fear of retaliation and without fear of losing their careers. That bill was very near and dear to my heart because that's what happened to me. I self-referred myself into the hospital because I was exhausted, I was depressed, I was tired, and I knew that I didn't want to hurt myself. But also the thoughts in my head were so heavy that, you know, I decided to self-refer myself. And as a result of me self-referring myself, I was referred for a mental health evaluation. And because I was having suicidal ideation, they determined that I wasn't fit for duty. And that's how I was discharged. I was discharged for PTSD due to a hostile work environment.
So even though the Brandon Act has passed, it's now law, do you feel that service members are taking advantage of that in terms of being able to raise their hand and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody? Or is it still, to your point, this fear of retaliation? You lose your security clearance, you lose your gun, you get a desk job. Have things changed even though there's law enacted now?
No, unfortunately, it hasn't. And it's going to take a long time to fix that problem, because there's still that stigma of, you know, the suck it up stigma, right? But I don't think leadership understands is that they're creating their own problems. You know, that goes back to that reactive behavior. You know, I was never a disrespectful NCO. I was very respectful. But when I was being disrespected by my leadership, you know, they were lying to me, stuff like that, I reacted in a way. I was standing up for myself. And so, you know, they wanted me to quit because they had no cause. So they loaded more work on me and created this occupational phenomenon. And it's kind of like, you have nowhere to go. You have nowhere to turn, because every direction I went, you know, everybody was scared to help me because of who was involved. And when you get to that point and you're all alone, and then you're all alone with yourself, that's bad. I don't know if you know who Chester from Lincoln Park is. He actually passed away. He actually died by suicide, but he did an interview and he said that the most dangerous place is up here. And when you suffer from complex post-traumatic stress, you know, that's something that some place that you don't want to ever be left alone, unsupervised, because it's very quick to go down that dark path that we talked about, and that's what leads to suicides. And right now, the military is struggling right now to get that momentum back, to get the respect back, and to get that discipline back. Because when you have good order and discipline, like, things tend to work in a, you know, how they're supposed to. Why? Because everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. Nobody's doing what they're not supposed to do. And the machine works. But when there's key components missing, respect, discipline, and leadership. Because if the commander isn't following the rules, why are you? You know, if the first sergeant is not setting an example, he's teaching that bad behavior to his younger troops. So now guess what? You're breeding a whole generation of I don't want to say dirtbags, but dirtbags. You know, and it's a product of your own creation. So we recently had Alaska, I believe it was Alaska. They've had a a large number of suicides in their unit, and the Army decided to to give them an identity and make it an airborne unit. And I thought, you know what, I mean, that's a good start. I think so, because you know what, when you have purpose, man, that nothing can stop you, right? You wanna do better, you wanna excel. And but I think that it's up to the leadership to pour into those soldiers and build them up. I mean, you're leaders, that's what you're supposed to do. And until we start doing that, we're going to have these problems. And it is getting worse instead of getting better.
Vincent van Gogh, who was no stranger to despair, said, "There is peace even in the storm." Where have you been able to find peace?
Finding comfort in the pain. You have to study it, learn about it, and process it and manage it. You know, it is my responsibility to manage my demons because I'm the one that has to face them every day. But once you do that, you're no longer afraid, and there's healing in that because you're no longer a prisoner to your own mind. And I'm able to find peace because I'm not afraid anymore. That fear is all gone.
And along that same line, author Jodi Patel wrote, "You're going to meet two kinds of people in life. Some will find you in tranquility and leave you broken. Some will meet you in turmoil and lead you to serenity." You've talked about how you were met in tranquility and left broken. Who has met you in turmoil and led you to serenity? And how do they accomplish that?
Well, you know, I've had to pick myself up a few times throughout my life, right? Once or twice.
One or two.
One or two. But you know, I was always doing that. I was always picking myself up, and you know what? You can't do this alone. You cannot do this alone. I was able to acknowledge my broken heart, and for the first time, and that's because I found a program called Save a Warrior. Save a Warrior is a nonprofit that helps veterans and first responders who suffer from suicide ideation. What they do, you know, their slogan is, "We came back for you." And that's exactly what they did. You know, when I was left in what did you call it? Left in turmoil or whatever.
Left in turmoil, exactly.
I was so broken. You know, I was abandoned. You know, I was left behind, and I needed someone to come back for me. I needed someone to help me. And the power of connection with other people, like-minded, and other people that are also broken. You're able to, like I said, you learn about your mental illness, you study it, and you become an expert in your own mental illness. And now you are in charge, and you can either use that for good, or you can go back to feeling sorry for yourself. And I don't know about you, but I like feeling good.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. Chris Romero, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite.
No, my pleasure. Glad we were able to make it work. If you or someone you know has been a victim of rape, abuse, or incest, you can get help from RAINN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. RAINN is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization and operates the National Sexual Assault Hotline. That number is 1-800-656-HOPE, and its website is rann.org. That's RAI2Ns.org. Thank you for tuning in to Next Steps Forward, and thanks to all the talented people at the Voice America Network who give us this time on the Empowerment Channel each week. I'm Chris Meek. For more details about upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure, and on Twitter at Chris Meek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.